You gonna order something, or are you just here to take up space? The words hit like a slap across the face. Eloan Price looked up from her folded hands to find a young man looming over her booth. He wore a cream-colored uniform shirt with brown piping along the sleeves. His apron hung loose and stained around his waist. A plastic name tag on his chest read Brock in bold letters. His mouth curled into something that wanted to be a smile but landed much closer to a sneer. Eloan had been sitting in this booth for 12 minutes. No menu. No water. No greeting. No acknowledgement whatsoever that she existed as a human being worthy of basic courtesy. Until now. I would like to order, she said quietly. Her voice carried the measured cadence of a woman who had learned long ago that volume was never necessary when you truly meant what you said. Just coffee and toast, please. Brock laughed. The sound was sharp and hollow. Not a laugh with her. A laugh at her. Coffee and toast. He repeated the words slowly, like they left a bad taste in his mouth. Big spender we got here. He planted one hand flat on the table and leaned closer. Listen, there's a senior center about 2 blocks down the road. They start serving early. Might be more your speed, you know what I mean. The diner fell silent. If you have ever watched someone be publicly humiliated and felt that fire rise up in your chest, type the word dignity in the comments right now. Make sure you hit subscribe because what this elderly woman does next is going to leave you absolutely speechless. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Eloan sat perfectly still in the worn vinyl booth. Her pale blue cardigan was buttoned neatly to the collar, pressed and clean despite being older than most of the furniture surrounding her. Small pearl earrings caught the morning light streaming through the window. Her gray hair was pinned back with careful precision, and her glasses rested on top of her head. She was 78 years old. Everything about her appearance spoke of discipline, of standards, of a lifetime spent doing things properly and expecting the same from others. This booth, this window, this stretch of cracked vinyl and faded wallpaper along forgotten Route 41 in southern Ohio. She had been coming here every single Thursday morning for 3 years. Since the week after her husband's funeral. Toast. Silence. Memory. A ritual that belonged to her alone. But Brock Calder did not know any of this. And Brock Calder clearly did not care to learn. Did you hear what I said? His voice rose loud enough for every customer in the place to hear. I said maybe this ain't the right spot for you, Grandma. A man in a flannel shirt glanced up from his plate of eggs, made eye contact with Eloan for half a second, then looked away and kept eating. A woman near the cash register suddenly found her phone incredibly fascinating. Dale Hendricks, the manager, watched everything unfold from his position behind the counter. His fingers drummed nervously against the register. His mouth stayed shut. Silence was easier. It always had been. Eloan looked directly at Brock. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter sky just before snow. Clear and calm and absolutely unwavering. I have been coming to this diner, she said, every Thursday morning for 3 years. Brock shrugged his broad shoulders. Yeah, well, times change. People like you don't always keep up with the program. People like you. The phrase hung suspended in the air between them. Sharp as shattered glass. Loud enough for every person in the room to hear and understand exactly what he meant by it. Eloan's fingers tightened around the strap of her worn leather purse. Just for a moment. Then she released her grip and let her hands fall still. I see, she said softly. She rose from the booth. The movement was slow and deliberate, the careful choreography of a woman whose bones remembered every cold winter and every hard fall and every single time she had gotten back up again. She gathered her newspaper from the table, smoothed the front of her cardigan, adjusted the glasses perched atop her gray hair. Brock watched her with his thick arms crossed over his chest, satisfaction spreading across his young face like he had just won some kind of victory. Smart choice, he said. Door's right over there. Eloan paused. She turned back to face him one final time. You remind me of men who think power is loud, she said. Her voice did not waver. Her hands did not tremble. It rarely is. She walked to the front door. The bell above it gave a weak and tired ring as she pushed through into the bright morning light. Behind her, Brock was already laughing, already turning to the regulars seated at the counter with his chest puffed out like a rooster. "Old lady actually tried to guilt-trip me," he announced loudly. "Like I owe her something. Can you believe that?" Dale chuckled nervously from behind the register. Outside, Eloise Price sat in her car in the parking lot for a very long time. Her thin hands rested on the steering wheel. The engine stayed off. The windows stayed rolled up. She did not cry. She had learned many years ago that tears were private things, earned through grief too deep for outside witnesses. But her heart was beating much faster than it should. She reached into her purse. Her fingers found her phone. For a long moment, she simply held it, staring at the dark screen, staring at a contact she had not called in many months. She did not want to make this call. Not today of all days. Not ever if she could possibly help it. But dignity had a line. And Brock Calder had just crossed it. Her thumb moved across the glass. The phone began to ring. One ring. Two. Then a voice answered. Controlled. Instantly alert. "Mom." Eloise closed her eyes. "It's me," she said quietly. "I need you to listen to something. Tell me everything that happened." 4 words. No panic in his voice. No wasted questions about why she was calling out of the blue. Just a calm command wrapped in velvet, waiting to be obeyed. Eloise told him. She kept her voice steady throughout, recounting every detail exactly the way he had taught her many years ago when he was still a young lawyer learning his craft. Facts first. Emotions later. Keep it clean and keep it simple. The name of the diner. The Red Clover. Southern Ohio, just off Route 41. The waiter's name from his plastic tag. Brock. Exactly what was said. Precisely how it was said. The manager who watched the entire incident unfold and chose to do absolutely nothing about it. She did not embellish a single detail. She did not allow herself to cry. When she finished speaking, there was silence on the line. 3 seconds passed. Then 4. Then her son spoke again. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes." "Are you hurt in any way?" "No. Just." She paused, searching for the right word. "Tired." Another stretch of silence. She could almost hear him thinking on the other end of the line. Processing information. Running calculations and scenarios she would never fully understand. "Stay in your car," he said finally. "Do not go back inside that building. I will handle this." The line went dead. Eloise set her phone down gently on the passenger seat and stared at the diner through her windshield. The old neon sign above the entrance flickered weakly in the daylight. Red Clover Diner, it read, though the R in Clover had been burned out for at least 6 months now. Through the smudged front window, she could see Brock. He was leaning casually against the counter now, gesturing broadly with both hands, laughing at something with the cook. Telling his story. His version of what had just happened between them. Eloise let her mind drift backward through the years. She thought about Harold. 49 years they had been married. 49 years of building a life together from nothing. 3 children raised on modest salaries. 2 grandchildren who called her Grammy and sent her crayon drawings in the mail. Harold used to sit across from her in that very booth every Thursday morning. He would steal the little packets of strawberry jam because he knew she preferred the grape. He would read the sports section of the newspaper while she worked on the crossword puzzle. They rarely spoke much during those quiet mornings together. They never needed to. Then one cold morning, Harold simply did not wake up. The doctors called it peaceful. Natural. A good way to go, if such a thing truly existed. Eloise called it the end of everything she had ever known or understood about her life. For 3 years following his death, she had maintained the ritual faithfully. Cemetery at 7 in the morning. Diner at 9. The same booth by the window. The same simple order. A small rebellion against the crushing emptiness. Until this particular Thursday. Until some young man with a sneer and a stained apron decided she did not belong in a public establishment. Her phone buzzed softly against the leather seat. A text message. From her son. 2 words glowed on the screen. On it, she read those 2 words 3 times over. Somewhere far away, in offices and buildings she could not picture and would never visit, things were beginning to move. Wheels were beginning to turn. She did not know exactly what her son did for his work these days. He had taken a position in Washington many years ago. He stopped talking directly about his job, started talking around it instead, in vague circles that revealed nothing. She had learned not to ask too many questions. Mothers eventually learn when not to ask. But she remembered what he had told her at Harold's funeral. He had pulled her aside from the other mourners, taken both her hands in his, and spoken in that low, steady voice of his. "You call me if anyone ever gives you any trouble," he had said. "Anyone at all. For any reason at all. And I will handle it personally." She had laughed softly at the time. Told him not to worry so much about his old mother. Told him she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. He had not smiled. Now, sitting alone in her car outside a rundown diner where a young man had just made her feel like absolutely nothing, she finally understood what her son had meant. And she was about to discover exactly what kind of man he had become. Inside the Red Clover diner, Brock Calder grabbed a plastic tray stacked with dirty dishes and headed toward the kitchen, still grinning broadly at his own cleverness. He had absolutely no idea that in less than 1 hour, his full name would be spoken aloud in rooms he could not imagine. And he had no idea whatsoever who was about to walk through that front door. Should have seen the look on her face. Brock dropped the heavy tray of dishes onto the stainless steel counter with a loud clatter. Daryl McKenna, the cook, did not even bother looking up from the griddle where he was scraping burnt egg residue with a blackened spatula. Like I was supposed to feel guilty or something. Brock poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot without paying for it. Lady looked like she was about to start crying right there in the booth. Classic. Daryl grunted in response. He was 62 years old and had worked at this diner for 9 long years. He had learned somewhere along the way that keeping his mouth shut was the only reliable method of keeping his job. "You probably shouldn't talk to paying customers that way," Dale muttered from his usual spot behind the cash register, though his eyes remained fixed on his phone screen the entire time he spoke. Brock waved dismissively. "What's she gonna do about it? Call the cops and report me for hurting her precious feelings?" He laughed loudly at his own joke. "Relax, Dale. Nobody in the world cares what happens to some random old lady who can't take a hint." The morning crawled forward at its usual sluggish pace. More customers drifted in and out through the squeaky front door. Brock moved between the tables and booths with the same lazy arrogance he always displayed, treating anyone who appeared to be over 50 years old like they were personally inconveniencing him by existing. At exactly 10:47, his phone buzzed in his back pocket. A text message from his buddy Marcus across town. "Yo dude. You might want to check out the parking lot right now." Brock frowned at the screen. He walked to the front window and pushed aside the faded curtain. A black SUV had pulled into the parking lot. Government plates. Heavily tinted windows. It sat there idling in the morning sun, perfectly still, like a predator waiting for the right moment. "What the hell?" Brock muttered under his breath. Then a second black SUV pulled in and parked directly beside the first one. Same official plates. Same dark windows. Dale finally looked up from his phone. "What's going on out there?" "No idea." For 30 long seconds, absolutely nothing happened. The 2 SUVs sat motionless in the parking lot. Their engines hummed quietly. The sun reflected off their polished black hoods. Then all 4 doors of the first vehicle swung open simultaneously. 3 men stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. Dark suits. Crisp white shirts. Posture that absolutely did not belong anywhere in southern Ohio. They moved in tight formation, precise and unhurried, crossing the parking lot in lockstep toward the diner's front entrance. Brock felt something cold and unfamiliar slide down the length of his spine. He told himself it meant nothing. Told himself that government types probably stopped at roadside diners all the time. Probably just grabbing coffee on their way to somewhere more important. But they were not looking at the menu board taped in the window. They were looking directly at him. The bell above the front door rang. The first man through was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. His gaze swept across the interior of the diner like he was mentally cataloging every face, every exit, every potential problem in the room. He reached into his jacket pocket. Brock's throat tightened involuntarily. The man pulled out a badge, flashed it toward Dale behind the counter. The motion was so fast and practiced it almost seemed polite. "Who's in charge of this establishment?" Dale's face drained of all color instantly. I'm the manager on duty. Dale Hendricks. Is there some kind of problem here, officer?" The agent did not answer the question. His cold eyes continued scanning the room until they landed squarely on Brock and stopped there. "Locked in place. Is there somewhere private we can have a conversation?" Dale nodded frantically. "Back office. Right this way, sir." But the agent held up one hand to stop him. "Not you." He pointed one long finger directly at Brock. "Him. We need to speak with him." Every single head in the diner turned simultaneously. The coffee cup trembled slightly in Brock's grip. "Me." His voice cracked embarrassingly on the single syllable. "What the hell did I do?" The agent's expression did not change even slightly. "That is precisely what we are here to determine, Mr. Calder." The way he said the name made it clear this was not a random stop. This was not a coincidence. These men had come here looking specifically for him, and they had found exactly what they were looking for. Brock set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. In the parking lot, visible through the window, Eloane Price sat perfectly still in her car. Watching. Waiting. And for the first time in his 26 years of life, Brock Calder realized that he had made a terrible mistake. The back office smelled like old grease and older paper and the kind of despair that accumulates in small rooms where nothing good ever happens. Brock sat rigidly in a rusty folding chair. Two of the agents stood near the closed door like statues carved from stone. The third agent, the tall one with gray temples who had flashed the badge, sat directly across from him. A plain manila folder rested unopened on the cluttered desk between them. "State your full legal name for the record." "Brock Allen Calder." His voice came out slightly steadier than he actually felt. "How long have you been employed at this establishment?" "About 2 weeks. Maybe 3. "Look, I don't understand what. Were you working this morning?" The agent cut him off cleanly. "Yeah. I already told you that. Did you interact with an elderly female customer approximately 90 minutes ago? Gray hair, blue cardigan, pearl earrings. Sitting alone in the booth by the front window." Brock's stomach dropped through the floor. He had already forgotten about her. She was just another face. Just another annoyance. Just another nobody who had wandered into his section expecting to be treated like she actually mattered somehow. But these men clearly had not forgotten. "Yeah, sure. She was sitting in my section." "Describe the nature of your interaction with this customer." "She wanted to order something. I suggested that maybe she might be more comfortable going somewhere else." He paused and wet his lips with his tongue. "That's all. No big deal." "Those were your exact words? That she might be more comfortable somewhere else?" Brock shifted uncomfortably in the metal chair. "Something like that." The agent opened the manila folder with deliberate slowness. Inside were several printed pages. Photographs. Time-stamped documents. "We have obtained 3 witness statements describing your conduct toward this woman." He slid one page across the desk. Quote, "People like you don't always keep up." End quote. He slid another page forward. Quote, "This section is for paying customers, not people just here to take up space." End quote. A third page joined the others. Quote, "There's a senior center down the road that might be more your speed." End quote. Brock's face flushed dark red. "I was just doing my job. Trying to keep the place moving." "Your job description includes harassing elderly citizens?" It wasn't harassment. She was taking up a booth and not ordering anything. She attempted to place an order. You refused to serve her. That's not what happened. You made multiple discriminatory remarks based on her age in a public establishment. The agent's voice remained perfectly level, almost bored. You denied service to a paying customer based on her perceived age and economic status. You deliberately created a hostile environment that forced her to leave the premises. Brock's hands gripped his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. Who is she? The question burst out before he could stop himself. She has to be somebody important. You don't send 3 federal agents for some random grandmother who got her feelings hurt at a diner. The agent studied him for a long moment. His expression revealed absolutely nothing. That information is not your concern. Like hell it isn't my concern. You're sitting here interrogating me over a 2-minute conversation about breakfast. Either she's somebody or this is all completely insane. The agent leaned back slowly in his chair. Let the silence stretch out like a rubber band being pulled to its breaking point. Then he spoke. The woman you publicly humiliated this morning is named Elowen Price. Brock blinked rapidly. The name meant absolutely nothing to him. Her son is Nathaniel Price. Still nothing. The agent allowed himself a small, thin smile. It was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of a cat watching a mouse realize there was nowhere left to run. Deputy Director Nathaniel Price. United States Department of Justice. Civil Rights Division. Every drop of blood drained from Brock's face. You publicly harassed, demeaned, verbally abused, and refused basic service to the elderly mother of one of the highest-ranking civil rights officials in the entire federal government. The agent closed the folder with a soft snap. You did this on camera, in front of multiple witnesses, while she was visiting her deceased husband's grave on the 3rd anniversary of his burial. Brock opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out but a dry croak. The agent rose to his feet. You are being placed on administrative hold pending a formal investigation into discriminatory conduct, harassment of a protected individual, and potential federal civil rights violations. Civil rights? Brock's voice came out as a high-pitched wheeze. For telling some old lady to try a different restaurant? You can't be serious right now. Every action leaves a record, Mr. Calder. The agent straightened his jacket. Even the ones you believe no one is watching. Especially those, in fact. He nodded to the 2 agents by the door. They stepped forward. We will need you to accompany us for formal processing and documentation. You have the right to contact an attorney at any time during this process. Out in the main dining room, every conversation had stopped dead. Customers sat frozen with forks halfway to their mouths. Phones had materialized from pockets and purses. Someone near the window was openly filming through the glass. Dale Hendricks stood paralyzed behind the cash register, his face the color of old dishwater, his managerial authority evaporating with every passing second. The bell above the front door rang again. A 4th man walked into the diner. He was tall, impeccably composed. His dark suit was cut differently than the agent's suits, more expensive, more tailored, carrying more authority in its fabric than Brock had encountered in his entire lifetime. This man did not look at Brock at all. He walked straight past the counter, past the gaping customers, past the recording phones, straight through the diner and out the back door into the parking lot. Through the grimy office window, Brock watched this man approach the parked car where the old woman still sat. He watched him open her door. He watched him kneel beside her on the asphalt and take her frail hand in both of his. And finally, much too late, Brock Calder understood exactly whose mother he had chosen to insult that morning. The car door stood open to the cool morning air. Elowen looked at her son kneeling on the asphalt beside her and felt something begin to loosen in the tight center of her chest. He held her hand gently in both of his face showing that same quiet calm she remembered from decades ago when he was just a boy and the world grew too loud and he would find her alone in the kitchen and simply sit with her without saying a single word. Mom. His voice was soft as cotton. Are you all right? She nodded slowly. Her throat felt thick. I didn't want to bother you with this. You never bother me. He squeezed her thin fingers. You should have called me much sooner. It was just words. Stupid words from a stupid young man. Words matter. His jaw tightened for just a moment. Then it relaxed again. That is exactly why I do what I do. Nathaniel Price had left Ohio when he was 22 years old with a scholarship to Georgetown Law and a burning certainty that the world could be made more fair. A prestigious clerkship with a federal judge followed graduation. Then a decade of climbing steadily through the ranks of the Justice Department until he reached a position that most ordinary citizens did not know existed. He did not give speeches or press conferences. His face never appeared on cable news programs. His name rarely surfaced in newspaper articles or online reports. But when civil rights violations occurred anywhere in the country, when discrimination went unpunished and the powerful crushed the powerless beneath their heels, his office was the one that received the phone call. He made things happen. Quietly, efficiently, without any fanfare or self-congratulation. And now he was here, kneeling on cracked asphalt in a forgotten parking lot in southern Ohio, holding his mother's hand while federal agents conducted interviews inside a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and casual cruelty. What happens to him now? Eloin asked quietly. Nathaniel considered the question carefully before answering. That depends entirely on what the full investigation uncovers. I don't want to destroy his life, Nathaniel. He's young. He's foolish. He doesn't know any better. You didn't destroy anything. A slight edge crept into his voice. He made his own choices this morning. Every single one of them documented. He believed nobody was watching. He believed nobody would care what happened to one elderly woman in a roadside diner. He met her eyes directly. He was profoundly wrong about both things. Inside the diner, visible through the large front window, Brock Calder was being escorted from the back office by 2 federal agents. His face had gone pale as milk. The confident swagger that had defined him an hour earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by the shuffling uncertainty of a man walking through deep water toward an unknown shore. The remaining customers stared openly, some with visible satisfaction on their faces, others with the uncomfortable expression of people who had witnessed something they could no longer pretend to ignore. Dale Hendricks trailed behind the small procession, stammering explanations to anyone who would listen. I had no idea who she was. I swear on my life. He only started working here 2 weeks ago. I didn't see everything that happened between them. The lead agent turned his head slightly. You saw enough, Mr. Hendricks. You chose to do nothing about what you saw. Dale's mouth opened and closed several times. His excuses crumbled into dust before they could fully form. Outside in the parking lot, Eloin watched Brock emerge through the front door into the harsh sunlight. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. The arrogance that had filled him like helium just 1 hour ago had leaked away entirely, replaced by something she recognized immediately. Fear. The sudden realization that consequences actually existed in the world. That someone had been watching after all. That actions had weight and words had power and nobody was ever truly too small or too old to matter. Brock's darting eyes swept across the parking lot and found her car. Found her sitting in the passenger seat. Found Nathaniel still kneeling protectively beside her. For one frozen moment, their eyes met across the distance. Eloin expected to feel satisfaction. Vindication. The sweet, warm taste of justice finally being served. Instead, she simply felt tired. Brock looked away first. The agents guided him firmly toward the waiting black SUV. He was not in handcuffs, not yet, but the message was perfectly clear to everyone watching. This was not a polite request. This was the first step of something he could not stop or escape. Nathaniel rose smoothly to his feet. He brushed gravel dust from the knees of his expensive trousers. I want you to come stay with me in Washington for a little while, he said. Just for a few days. Until all of this settles down and the media attention fades. I have responsibilities here. The house needs tending. The garden won't water itself. Mom. She looked up at her son. Her quiet, powerful, principled son who had built an entire career around the simple idea of protecting people who could not protect themselves. I'm perfectly fine, she insisted. Truly. I know you are. He smiled softly. But please let me take care of you anyway. Just this once. Dad would have wanted me to. A long pause stretched between them. Then Eloin nodded slowly. Inside the diner, through the smudged front window, she could see the other customers beginning to move again. Conversations cautiously resuming. The machinery of ordinary daily life grinding reluctantly back into motion. But nothing was ordinary anymore. Not for this place. Not for the people who had witnessed what happened here today. The federal agents would interview every witness, pull all available security footage, request employment records and cross-reference Brock's work history across multiple states. The investigation would take weeks, possibly months. And at the end of it all, there would be consequences. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Simply accountability. Nathaniel helped his mother gently out of her car. Together, they walked across the parking lot toward his own vehicle. He opened the passenger door for her and waited patiently until she was comfortably settled before closing it softly behind her. Before walking around to the driver's side, he paused. He looked back at the diner, at Dale standing frozen behind the front window, at the faded sign with its burned-out letter. His expression revealed nothing at all. But Eloin knew her son better than anyone alive. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was very far from over. You thought my mother was powerless. Nathaniel Price stood in the parking lot of the Red Clover Diner, exactly 4 feet away from Brock Calder. 2 federal agents flanked the younger man on either side. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Nathaniel's voice carried no anger, no heat, no raised volume whatsoever. Just the cold, surgical precision of a man who had spent his entire professional career methodically dismantling people who believed they were untouchable. Brock's face had gone the color of old chalk. His lips moved uselessly but no sound emerged. That is an extremely common mistake, Nathaniel continued. He did not blink, did not look away, did not offer even the slightest possibility of escape. People see gray hair and immediately assume weakness. They see wrinkles and immediately assume irrelevance. They see a woman sitting alone in a restaurant booth and assume that nobody in the world will notice or care how she is treated. He took one measured step closer. Brock flinched backward involuntarily. My mother raised 3 children while my father worked double shifts at the steel plant 6 days a week. She taught elementary school for 34 years. She helped more than 1,000 young people learn to read and write and believe in themselves. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She buried the love of her life 3 years ago and still manages to wake up every single morning, make her bed, tend her garden, and find reasons to keep on living despite the grief. He paused. She is the strongest human being I have ever known in my life. Through the diner's front window, pale faces pressed against the glass. At least 5 phones were recording through the smudged panes. Dale stood absolutely frozen behind the register, watching the scene unfold with the horrified expression of a man witnessing his own professional execution in slow motion. I didn't know. Brock's voice cracked badly on the words. I swear to God, sir, I had no idea who she was. If I had known she was your mother. That is precisely the point. Nathaniel cut him off with the verbal equivalent of a scalpel. You did not know. You did not care enough to find out. You saw someone you assumed could not possibly fight back against you, and you chose deliberate cruelty because cruelty felt easy and consequence-free. He leaned in closer, close enough that Brock could see the small flecks of gold floating in his brown eyes. I have spent my entire adult life dealing with people exactly like you, Mr. Calder. People who punch down at those they perceive as weaker because punching up requires actual courage. People who mistake cruelty for strength and silence for submission. His voice dropped even lower. They always look so surprised when they discover how wrong they were. Brock's lower lip trembled. Actual tears were beginning to form in the corners of his eyes. The tough guy persona had completely collapsed like a house built from wet cardboard. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Please. I'll apologize to her directly. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Nathaniel straightened up, adjusted his suit jacket, regarded the younger man with an expression of absolute neutrality. You will indeed apologize. You will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You will answer every question truthfully and completely. He paused. And then you will face whatever consequences the investigation determines are appropriate. Not because of who my mother is, not because of who I am, but because actions have consequences, and no one is entitled to escape them simply because they believed no one important was watching. He turned his back on Brock without another word, walked across the parking lot, opened the driver's door of his car where his mother sat waiting. Before sliding behind the wheel, he spoke one final time without turning around. "I don't raise my voice, Mr. Calder. I never have. I make phone calls instead. And the calls have already been made." The engine started. The car backed slowly out of its parking space. Eloan looked at her son's profile as he drove. The set of his jaw, the steadiness of his hands on the wheel, the absolute certainty radiating from every line of his body. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Confront him directly like that." "Yes, I did." "Why?" He was silent for a long moment. The diner grew smaller in the rearview mirror. "Because Dad would have," he finally said. "Because when someone hurts the people you love, you don't just send lawyers and agents and paperwork. You stand in front of them yourself. You look them in the eye. You make absolutely certain they understand exactly who they chose to harm and exactly why that was the worst decision they ever made." Eloan felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time all morning. "Your father would be so proud of you. He'd be prouder of you." Nathaniel glanced over at her. "You made the call. You refused to just absorb it and move on like it didn't matter. That took more courage than anything I did today." The road stretched ahead of them. Green hills rolled past on either side. The cemetery where Harold lay buried disappeared behind a curve. "What happens now?" Eloan asked. "Now the investigation takes its course. Witness interviews, employment records, background checks. Everything documented, everything verified, everything by the book." "And the diner?" "That depends on what we find. On how deep the problems go. On how many other people were treated the way you were treated today." Eloan nodded slowly. She suspected she already knew the answer. The Red Clover Diner had been sliding downhill for years. Ignored complaints. Declining standards. A manager who chose the path of least resistance every single time. Brock Calder was not the disease. He was merely the most visible symptom. And symptoms, once identified, had a way of leading investigators to much deeper problems. The car turned onto the highway heading east toward Washington. Behind them, the Red Clover Diner sat in its parking lot like a wounded animal waiting to see if it would survive. It would not have to wait very long to find out. The first official complaint resurfaced within 72 hours. A woman named Geraldine Foster, 71 years old, had filed a written report with the County Consumer Protection Office exactly 8 months earlier. She claimed that a server at the Red Clover Diner had refused to seat her at a booth, stating that the restaurant was too crowded when more than half the booths sat completely empty. The server's name listed on the complaint, Brock Calder. The complaint had been formally filed, officially acknowledged, quietly dismissed for lack of sufficient evidence. Now it was being reopened with renewed interest. 4 days later, a second complaint emerged from the archives. This one from a man named Theodore Washington, 68, who stated that a young waiter had informed him that the diner's best seats were reserved for regular customers, and that he clearly did not look like a regular customer. Same server. Same pattern of behavior. Same ultimate result. Filed. Acknowledged. Buried. Forgotten. The federal investigators pulled Brock's complete employment records from his previous jobs across 3 different states. A family restaurant in Columbus. A breakfast cafe in Dayton. A truck stop diner near Cincinnati. Each personnel file told essentially the same story. Complaints from older customers. Documented incidents of rudeness and disrespect. Patterns of discriminatory behavior dressed up in official language as personality conflicts or miscommunication issues. Brock had never once been terminated for his behavior at any of these establishments. He had simply moved on to new employment before consequences could accumulate sufficiently to catch up with him. A favorable reference here. A personal favor there. A manager too tired or too indifferent to deal with the necessary paperwork. Until now. The federal investigation expanded rapidly in scope. What had begun as a single incident at a forgotten roadside diner was transforming into a comprehensive case study of systemic institutional failure. How many other Brocks were currently working in restaurants and retail stores across the country, moving freely from job to job, leaving long trails of humiliation and degradation behind them. How many other Dales were watching the mistreatment happen and actively choosing to look the other way? The Red Clover Diners parent company, a small holding corporation based in Cleveland, issued a carefully worded public statement expressing deep concern about the allegations and promising a thorough internal review of all policies and procedures. Within 1 week of the incident, Dale Hendricks was placed on indefinite administrative leave without pay. Within 2 weeks, the Red Clover Diners business license was officially suspended pending health and safety inspections that had somehow been delayed and overlooked for nearly 3 years. Within 1 month, the front doors were locked permanently. A handwritten cardboard sign appeared in the front window, temporarily closed for renovations. Everyone who saw it knew it was a lie. The diner would never reopen under its current ownership. The building would sit vacant and deteriorating, another ghost along forgotten Route 41, until eventually someone purchased the property for pennies on the dollar and transformed it into something entirely different. But the story did not end with a closed restaurant and a suspended license. Because Elowen Price was not the only person who had been paying close attention. Across the country, the case had begun attracting significant media attention. Local news stations picked up the story first. Then regional outlets. Then, gradually and inevitably, national coverage followed. Not because of Nathaniel. He refused every interview request, declined all media comment, kept his own name out of the headlines as much as humanly possible. But because of Elowen, a 78-year-old widow, visiting her husband's grave on the anniversary of his death, publicly humiliated by an arrogant young man who assumed she had no one, defended by a son who worked in the shadows to protect people exactly like her. The story resonated deeply with people everywhere. Thousands of strangers across the country began sharing their own similar experiences online. Parents mistreated at restaurants. Grandparents ignored in retail stores. Elderly neighbors dismissed, belittled, made to feel invisible and worthless by a society that had collectively decided they no longer mattered. Comment sections overflowed with anger and painful recognition. A hashtag emerged organically and trended nationally for 3 consecutive days. And in a small studio apartment in Columbus, Ohio, Brock Calder sat completely alone, staring at his phone screen, watching his own name become permanently synonymous with everything people despised about how the elderly were treated in America. He had not been formally arrested, not yet officially charged with any crime. The investigation remained ongoing, and his lawyer maintained there was still a chance, slim but real, that he might ultimately avoid criminal liability. But none of that mattered anymore. His face was everywhere. His exact words were quoted in countless articles. His name had become a punchline, a cautionary tale, a symbol of casual cruelty. No restaurant would ever hire him again. No customer-facing position would touch his application. He had wanted desperately to be noticed and remembered. Now he was. Just not remotely in the way he had ever imagined. Elowen sat at her son's kitchen table in Washington, D.C., watching pale morning light spill through tall windows that overlooked a city she barely recognized anymore. 6 weeks had passed since the diner. She had originally intended to stay only a few days. But Nathaniel had gently convinced her to remain longer, and the guest room was genuinely comfortable, and the simple truth was she did not feel ready to return to Ohio just yet. Not because she was frightened. Elowen Price had never been a frightened woman. But because something fundamental had shifted deep inside her during these past weeks, and she needed time and space to understand exactly what it was. Nathaniel poured fresh coffee into her favorite mug and sat down across from her at the table. He looked tired this morning, the particular kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying responsibilities no one else could see or fully comprehend. "The investigation is nearly complete," he said. "Official findings will be announced sometime next week." And then what happens? Formal recommendations for policy changes at the federal level. Mandatory training requirements for service industry employees regarding treatment of elderly customers. Significantly expanded legal protections for senior citizens in public accommodations. Elowen sipped her coffee slowly. Let the warmth spread through her chest. All of that because of one Thursday morning. Because of you, Mom. His voice was firm. Because you made the phone call. Because you refused to simply absorb it and pretend it didn't happen. She set her mug down carefully on the table, looked at her son directly, really looked at him, for a long quiet moment. I almost didn't call you, she admitted. I almost just drove home and tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that I was overreacting, that it wasn't worth bothering you about. Why didn't you? The question hung suspended in the air between them. Eloan considered it carefully before answering. Because your father would have been absolutely furious with me if I had, she finally said. Harold never let anyone push him around, and he certainly never let anyone push me around either. Not once in 49 years of marriage. She paused, remembering. If he had been sitting in that booth with me that morning, he would have. She trailed off. Could not finish the sentence. Nathaniel reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. He was there with you, he said quietly. In the way you stood your ground. In the way you refused to accept being treated like nothing. In the way you picked up that phone and called me even though every instinct told you not to bother. Eloan's eyes glistened with moisture. She did not actually cry. But she came closer than she had in a very long time. I never wanted revenge, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to truly understand that. I never wanted that young man's entire life destroyed over a 2-minute conversation. I know, Mom. I just wanted. She searched for exactly the right words. I wanted him to understand, truly understand, that I am not invisible, that none of us are invisible. That growing older does not mean we somehow forfeit our basic right to be treated with simple human kindness and dignity. Nathaniel nodded slowly. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her weathered hand. That is precisely why this matters so much, he said. Not because one thoughtless waiter was rude to one customer on one particular morning, but because millions of thoughtless people are rude to millions of elderly people in millions of places every single day across this country. And almost all of the time, nobody speaks up. Nobody takes action. Nobody demands that it stop. People just absorb the humiliation and move forward with their lives as if it were simply the natural price of growing old. He squeezed her fingers. You refuse to absorb it. You refuse to accept it as normal or inevitable. And now, because of that refusal, things are actually going to change. Maybe not everywhere. Maybe not overnight. But somewhere out there, some elderly woman is going to walk into a restaurant and be treated with basic dignity and respect because of what you did. Eloan looked out the window at the distant white dome of the Capitol building, gleaming against the blue morning sky. Your father would have been incredibly proud of you, she said quietly. The man you've become. The work you do. Nathaniel smiled softly. He would have been far prouder of you, Mom. I promise you that. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while. Mother and son. Grief and love. The heavy past and the uncertain future, meeting in a quiet kitchen on an ordinary Thursday morning that felt like anything but ordinary. Finally, Eloan spoke again. I want to go back. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Back to Ohio? Back to the diner? Or whatever remains of it now? I need to see it one more time. He studied her face carefully. Why? Because that is where I said goodbye to your father every year for 3 years. That booth. That window. That view of the cemetery on the hill. She lifted her chin slightly. And I absolutely refuse to let some arrogant young man with a bad attitude take that away from me. The place may be closed now, but the memories still belong to me. A slow nod from her son. Then we will go together. This weekend. I'll clear my schedule. You don't have to. I want to. He squeezed her hand one final time. We'll go together. The parking lot was completely empty. Eloan stepped carefully out of Nathaniel's car and stood on the exact same patch of cracked asphalt where she had sat 3 months earlier, her thin hands trembling on the steering wheel, her phone pressed against her ear. The Red Clover Diner looked somehow smaller now in its abandonment. The windows were dark and dusty. The neon sign had been completely removed, leaving only a pale rectangular ghost on the weathered wooden facade where the familiar letters used to glow. A faded paper notice was taped to the inside of the front door, closed by order of the county health department. But someone had placed another sign beneath it, handwritten in black marker on a piece of torn cardboard, leaning carefully against the dirty glass where anyone driving past could see it. "Thank you, Miss Price." Eloise stared at those 4 words for a very long time. Nathaniel stood quietly beside her, giving her space, letting her process the moment in her own way. "Who put that there?" she finally asked. "I honestly don't know. It appeared about 3 weeks ago. Someone from town, most likely. Someone who remembered what happened here and wanted you to know it mattered." She walked slowly closer to the door, reached out and touched the rough surface of the cardboard with her fingertips. Someone had remembered. Someone out there had cared enough to write these simple words and leave them here in this empty parking lot, knowing full well that she might never return to see them. But she had returned. And it mattered. It mattered deeply. "The new owners finalize the property purchase next month," Nathaniel said. "They're planning to convert the building into a community resource center. Senior services, after-school tutoring programs, job training workshops. That sort of thing." Eloise turned to look at him with knowing eyes. "You arranged all of that, didn't you?" It was not phrased as a question. He shrugged almost imperceptibly. "I made a few phone calls. Offered some suggestions to the right people. The community made all the actual decisions themselves." She shook her head slowly, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You are exactly like your father. Doing everything important quietly, behind the scenes, never once taking public credit for any of it. I learned from watching the best." They walked together around the side of the building, past the rusting dumpsters, past the delivery entrance with its faded NO parking sign, around to the small patch of weedy grass behind the diner where a simple wooden bench now sat facing the distant hills. Eloise had never noticed this space before. All those Thursday mornings visiting this place, and she had never once thought to walk around behind the building. "This is new," she said. "Donated and installed last week by anonymous donors." Nathaniel gestured toward a small brass plaque mounted on the bench's backrest. "Read the inscription." She leaned closer, squinting slightly in the afternoon light. "In loving memory of Harold Price. Devoted husband. Beloved father. Faithful friend. May we all treat one another with the kindness he showed throughout his life." Eloise's breath caught sharply in her throat. "Nathaniel, it was entirely the community's idea," he said quickly. "People from town came together and wanted to do something meaningful and lasting. All I did was give them his name." She lowered herself slowly onto the bench, ran her weathered hands along the smooth wooden armrests, looked out across the overgrown field toward the green hills where the old cemetery stood. Her husband's grave was just barely visible through the trees. A small white stone on a gentle hillside, catching the afternoon sun. For 3 long years, she had been coming to this diner to feel close to Harold, to sit in the booth where he always sat, to order the coffee he always ordered, to remember what it felt like to be loved completely by another human being. Now there was a bench with his name engraved on it, a permanent place where anyone could sit and rest and think about kindness. It was so much more than she had ever expected. So much more than she had ever dared to ask for. Nathaniel sat down beside her on the bench. They did not speak. They did not need to speak. The afternoon sunlight warmed their faces. A gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass and distant coming rain. Somewhere in the hills behind them, a mockingbird sang its borrowed songs. And for the first time since Harold had died, Eloise felt something she had almost completely forgotten existed. Not happiness exactly, not joy, but genuine peace. The quiet knowledge that she had done something good and true and lasting. That her husband's memory would continue living on in ways she had never imagined. That the pain of that terrible morning had somehow been transformed into something meaningful and beautiful. She reached over and took her son's hand in hers. "Thank you," she whispered. He squeezed gently. "Thank you for making that phone call. Thank you for trusting me." They sat together on Harold's bench as the sun began its slow descent toward the western hills. The Red Clover Diner stood empty and silent behind them, waiting for its transformation into something new. And somewhere out there, in diners and restaurants and coffee shops across America, elderly people were being treated just a little bit better than they had been treated before. Because one woman had refused to stay silent. Because one son had answered the phone. Because sometimes, the quietest people turn out to have the loudest impact of all. 9 months later, Elowen Price walked through the front door of a coffee shop in downtown Columbus. It looked nothing like the Red Clover Diner. This place was bright and modern, with exposed brick walls and hanging plants and soft music playing through invisible speakers. Young people hunched over laptop computers at small tables. The smell of fresh roasted coffee beans filled the warm air. She felt out of place here, but she had promised her granddaughter that she would try new things, explore new places, stop living so much in the past. A young woman behind the counter smiled warmly as Elowen approached. "Good morning. Welcome in. What can I get started for you today?" Elowen studied the chalkboard menu hanging above the counter. So many options. So many words and combinations she did not fully understand. "I would like a coffee, please. Just regular coffee. And some toast if you have it." The young woman's smile widened even further. "Absolutely, we can do that. Any particular type of toast? We have sourdough, whole wheat, multigrain, rye. Sourdough would be lovely. Thank you. Perfect choice. Can I get a name for the order?" "Elowen." The young woman wrote the name on a paper cup with a black marker. Then she paused, looked up. Her eyes widened with sudden recognition. "Wait." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Elowen Price? Are you Elowen Price?" Elowen blinked in surprise. "I guess." "Oh my gosh." The young woman's voice trembled slightly. "I know exactly who you are. I saw the whole story online. You're the woman from that diner. The one whose son is the deputy director. I read everything about what happened to you." Elowen felt her cheeks flush warm with embarrassment. "I'm really not anyone famous." "You absolutely are to me." The young woman leaned forward across the counter, her eyes bright and earnest. "My grandmother went through something almost identical last year. A cashier at a grocery store made fun of the way she was counting her change. Called her slow. Said she was holding up the line for everyone else." Her voice cracked slightly. "My grandmother never told anyone in the family about it. She just came home that afternoon and cried alone in her bedroom. I only found out months later when she finally admitted why she had stopped going to that store." Elowen's heart ached. "When I read about what happened to you," the young woman continued, "and how you stood up for yourself, and how everything changed because you refused to stay silent, I printed out the entire article and gave it to my grandmother. I told her that she matters, that she doesn't have to accept being treated badly by anyone, that her dignity is worth fighting for." "What did she say?" The young woman smiled through tears. "She said she wished she had a son like yours." Elowen laughed softly, her own eyes growing moist. "He is certainly one of a kind. But it wasn't just him that made the difference." The young woman shook her head firmly. "It was you. You made the choice to speak up. You made the decision to call for help. You refused to just let it go and move on. That is what made everything else possible." She slid a steaming cup of coffee across the counter. "Your order is on the house today, Mrs. Price. And every single day you come in here from now on." Elowen opened her mouth to politely protest, but the young woman held up her hand. "Please. It would mean the whole world to me. Let me do this small thing." A long pause. Then Elowen nodded graciously. "Thank you. That is very kind of you." She found an empty seat by the window. The same position she always instinctively chose. Some habits were simply too deep to break after so many years. The coffee arrived. The toast followed. Both were perfect. She ate slowly, watching the busy world pass by outside the window. Young people hurrying to important appointments. Parents pushing strollers down the crowded sidewalk. An elderly man in a gray coat walking a small white dog, moving carefully but steadily down the street, savoring each step. He glanced through the window as he passed. Caught her eye. Smiled and tipped his hat. Elowen smiled back and raised her coffee cup in a small salute. This was what she had truly wanted all along. Not revenge. Not fame. Not even justice in any abstract legal sense. Just this. Connection. Recognition. Acknowledgement. The simple dignity of being seen and treated like a human being who still mattered despite the gray in her hair and the wrinkles on her face. The quiet confirmation that 78 years of living had earned her a rightful place at any table she chose to sit at. Her phone buzzed softly in her purse. A text message from Nathaniel. "Thinking of you today, Mom. Proud of you always." She typed her reply slowly, her careful fingers finding each letter on the small screen. "Proud of you too, sweetheart. Always have been. Always will be." She set the phone down and finished her toast. Outside, the sun climbed steadily higher in the clear blue sky. The day stretched ahead, full of small possibilities and quiet mercies and the gentle kindness of strangers. Eloise Price did not know what tomorrow would bring. She never had. No one ever truly does. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would face whatever came next the same way she had faced everything else in her long life. With dignity. With grace. With patience. With the hard-won knowledge that silence was never the same thing as weakness, and that kindness was never the same thing as submission. And if anyone, anywhere, ever forgot those fundamental truths, she knew exactly who to call. This story was never about revenge. It was about remembering that every single person on this earth deserves to be treated with basic respect and dignity, regardless of their age, their appearance, or how quiet they may seem. If this story touched your heart today, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you never miss another video that inspires and uplifts your spirit. Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. Tell us about a time when someone underestimated you because of your age, your appearance, or your silence. Your story might be exactly what another person needs to hear today to find their own courage. And if you know an elderly person in your life who could use a reminder that they are seen, they are valued, and they are deeply loved, please share this video with them today. Because dignity is never given to us by others. It is claimed by us for ourselves. And sometimes, all it takes is one phone call to change absolutely everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of a community that still believes kindness and respect and human dignity truly matter. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.